Hey everyone, morning.
Hi Alex, how you doing, man?
Doing great, man. Thanks. And the tips you gave me yesterday work like a charm.
Yeah, we just got to get them so that not tips. It's written down.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was asking Renan if we can get a slot in your meeting this afternoon, and if you got the same slot, it would be great for that quick hands-on on generating the certificates and using our sandbox directory.
Tim, can you see
if you guys can accommodate, it would be great.
Yeah, Tim, could you see if David's got 30 minutes?
Good morning, everyone. I think we have 220 plus people already.
Yeah, let's start. So, Rafa, I'll just make a quick introduction and then hand over to you very quickly. Bom dia, pessoal. Então, aqui a gente vai ter início aqui um workshop em que a Radiant vai apresentar a ferramenta de certificação de APIs. A gente tem aí, conforme comunicado e enviado sexta-feira, uma série de interações aí com os participantes do Open Banking para deixar mais claro e esclarecer dúvidas, todo o processo de certificação funcional e de segurança, né, falando do motor de conformidade. Então, aqui eu vou passar aqui a palavra para o Ralph, para o time da Radiant, que vão fazer essa demonstração aí de como é a ferramenta de certificação funcional. So, Ralph, well, let's start.
Cool. Okay. So, firstly, thanks very much for the opportunity to demonstrate to the entire ecosystem. 244 people is a huge turnout, so it's very much appreciated. Everything that we're about to demo is against live systems, so we're going to be demonstrating against a reference bank that we have stood up for testing the tests. We will be using live instances of the certification tests, of which there are 3 that you will see today. The first one being an end-to-end dynamic client registration process, which integrates with the Open Banking directory to obtain software statement assertions, discover a bank, register with a bank, create a consent, and obtain authorization for a customer to share data. So that'll be an end-to-end flow. The second test that we will show is the newly released Open Banking Brazil certification test suite, which will use the clients that have been dynamically generated in step 1. And I'm not going to demonstrate all of the different tests there. I'm just going to demonstrate the main happy and unhappy path tests. There are about 50 or 60 different tests that banks will have to go through in order to obtain certification. And then the final one is we'll demonstrate the functional APIs, which will show how you can use the Open Banking, the same set of clients, to then start testing, once you're through your front doors, the functional APIs and the functional endpoints. We'll be doing that using the accounts API and the consents API, and it will demonstrate the end-to-end flow and then data access retrievals for this process. As I said, all of this is live. Please be nice. And it is at the moment, when we get to it, a little bit of a moving target, and we'll demonstrate what happens when you have a failing test, and then we can have a look at some of the analysis processes that we have to go through in order to work out why a test has failed. Is it a problem with the spec? Is it a problem with the test? Is it a problem with the API? As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to stick your hand up. And let us know. So just let me turn off notifications. Before I begin, does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. And just don't everyone shout at once. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if they can see my screen?
We can.
Excellent, fantastic. Okay, so the first set of the and a little bit of background. So there are two open source conformance and certification test projects, both of which are hosted on GitLab. The first one is the OpenID Conformance Suite, which I believe details of this have been shared previously. On the wiki page for the OpenID Certification Test Suite is an example configuration for the Brazil Dynamic Client Registration Test Suite. It is using my credentials and my password. Remember, as part of the consent process that's been adopted by Brazil, you've got to nominate a CPF ID up front as part of the end-to-end user journey, which unfortunately that means that you need to have the accounts pre-created. You can't just use login with Google or login with any of the other identity providers that you otherwise could have. Inside the content contains a private key that I'm going to use for any of the signing operations, my mutual TLS certificates, a link to the directory, and the client ID on the directory that corresponds to this particular software, and the API-based path for the directory's APIs. The directory's API scheme has been published before. All of the functionality that you see available on the UI is available via API, which means that TPPs will be able to do discovery, searching, software statement generation, and then dynamic client registration. Now, putting all of that together, and that is accomplished together, we're going to come to the certification test suite, which is available at certification.id.net. Test plan, and I'm going to select Brazil Dynamic Client Registration Authorization Server Test. Now, the bank that is, or the software that is being, that is the bank that we're going to be doing this test against, supports all combinations that you can that are available for the Brazilian security profile. So that Radium stack supports private key MTLS, pushed authorization by value or by reference, and also the two response modes that you can support. Now, banks are obliged, as I understand it, to support only one combination, but they are encouraged to advertise and certify that they can support whatever different options that they like. For those that have read the security profile, adhering to and supporting plain response is mandatory, but we do encourage banks that can support JARM to advertise that they can support JARM, because it does actually make some of the processing easier for TPPs. So any of these configurations, you can log in here and you can just update your information with your software that's registered on the Brazil sandbox, point it at your bank, and you can start testing. So what I recommend that you do is make sure that you save off your JSON for once you finish plugging it in, and because it can get quite annoying if you keep having to type multiple different values into different fields. So without further ado, let's create a test plan. Right, so in the DCR test, we've only got one happy path flow. At the moment, we're going to run that, and off we go. So we've got the number of tests running, successes, failures, warning, and we're now at step 62, and wow, looks like we're done. We're being asked to prompt for a user login. So let's go and have a quick look before we do that as to what's being done. So we have performed dynamic client registration. The test pack has built the dynamic client registration request. It has posted the dynamic client registration request to the server. It received a response saying, yes, your client has been created. We are now going to go and create the consents and the accounts in order to test that this client works. We have used client credentials grant to obtain a Brazilian consent, built the necessary request, and now we are asking the user to log in. Anything else that we want to do? Look at this whilst that's running. Call consent, bearer token, there's the response, all the TLS that's all being used. Cool. Now, I've already logged into my application, so my mock bank has already got a session for me, and I've kept it active just for the purpose of this testing, so I don't have to type my username and password each time. Now, that consent resource has been retrieved. We've looked at the permissions, and it said this client is looking for access to your account, bank account information. Please select the accounts that you want to give it access and finish the authorization step. Once the OIDF redirect component is finished or tab is finished, you can close that tab and you can come back to the the application that's finishing the process. It's verifying the authorization endpoint response, verifying the token endpoint response, making a call to the actual resource, checking for things like the headers, so XFAP and interaction ID, checking that it was a response type JSON, and as you can see here, there was a valid response to the account's endpoint. Looking back at our test results, we are now in a finished state, and you've successfully completed end-to-end dynamic client registration. And I'll do that again because it probably went quite quickly, and let's change a couple of different settings. So this time we're going to register an MTLS client, and we're going to do by pushed, and why not, let's use JARM. So I want to test that my server supports dynamic client registration with all those properties. I'm going to click Run Test. My test is going to run, obtain a software statement from the directory, register with the bank, create a consents resource, set the user up for testing my newly created client. I'm going to consent. I finish the consent process, and voila, I've successfully received accounts. Now that is open banking as it should be, and open banking as it should function end to end, with no barriers for entry for a TPP, being able to integrate with a bank, discover a bank, onboard to a bank, and send a customer all off for authentication to release data pretty much real time. Any questions on dynamic client registration?
Is there some way to test this within app authentication? And web to app authentication?
Yes. All of the flows can be done using app-to-app authentication flows. So if you test this on a mobile, it will do an app-to-app deep link if you've got your application appropriately registered with the Apple and Android processors. There's a whole section, user guides on testing the app-to-app deep linking flows. But yes, it supports all of that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. If there's no other questions on the dynamic client registration request, we're going to change the test, and now we're going to go through the security tests. So switching from OpenBank FAPI1 Advanced to a FAPI1 Advanced Final Authorization Server tests. Again, we're going to pick the variant. Yep.
Sorry, I think someone shared the screen and took control of the screen share. So if you could do it again. Yeah, it's showing. Thanks.
Cool. In this instance, I'm going to perform a FAPI1 Advanced Authorization test. I'm going to select that I want to use pushed authorization, and from my drop-down, I'm going to select the Open Banking Brazil variant. And again, the type of mode that I want to do is JARM. I'm going to take my configuration that I've saved earlier, just to paste it in to make my life a little bit easier, which again just contains my clients, my CPF for the user that I want to use for testing, the accounts, and the consents resource. And I'm going to create consent plan. Now, with the security tests, there are a lot of tests. Most of these are unhappy paths, so they're negative testing to make sure that the authorization server that you've got configured correctly rejects tests. So it does things like mixing up tokens, mixing up refresh tokens, mixing up certificates, making sure that the security of your authorization server is correct. And again, like the previous one, it's just a simple example of running through each of the tests and making sure that you are conformant. Now, there are tests that require you to do different things. So for this one is the primary happy path, where you're required to authenticate successfully twice. Validating. At all times, you can see the number of successful tests are going up. 154, 157. And we're going to do it again because we want to give this server a couple of different access tokens so it can do some tests against those two. And that's it. So if you've got an authorization server that is FAPI compliant, you have a valid consents API that's correctly wired in, that you've got your CPF checked and all of those additional requirements, executing the tests is quite straightforward. The same goes for some of the negative testing. So if we continue the plan and we go to execute the negative test, which says this test requires a user to reject consent, I'm going to click the cancel button. And it's going to confirm that the user rejected the consent twice. And voila, I have passed. At any time, you can return to the plan, and you can pick different tests. You can rerun different tests, and when you are finished with this, you can click on Publish Everything, and then generate a certification package. It will demonstrate that against the functional certification tests. Any questions on the security tests? Victor.
Hello. I have saw one test that is about multiple. I think is multiple approved. So, what are the scopes of this test? Because here in Brazil, we don't. I think we have a different scope than UK. What are the tests? What happened with these tests that are different from Brazil and UK?
So it's a good question. So the first thing is that from the security profile, nothing's been called out that is different from the UK versus the Brazil model. As I understand it, if you have a consent that requires additional authorizations, which is exactly the same as you have in Australia, the only thing that changes is the response that you get on the authorization, i.e. the resource call at the very end of payload. Now, the OpenID certification test suite doesn't actually validate the resource request. The resource request that comes through, whenever I can find the valid call, checks to make sure that it is a JSON and that it has the appropriate response type. So if you've got an authorization response that gives you, say, an empty accounts list because it requires additional authorization, that should still pass the security profile. If you need a specific test because it doesn't return an empty JSON and it needs to return some other message, then that needs to be defined and included inside the security profile as to what the error should be for a call to the accounts API, because I didn't see an error on the accounts API that said not yet authorized.
Got it. Thanks.
No worries. Any questions on the security tests? No? Again, the security
So far,
test,
so good.
you can do them all with app-to-app and mobile linking. And again, all of the configuration for these have been included inside the OpenID Foundation wiki, and the same configuration can be used in the functional certification test. So this is against the Radium reference bank. You've got the credentials there for the username and password, as well as the CPF ID that matches that corresponding account. So feel free to use these, feel free to play with them. Do let us know if you manage to break it. And as always, if you find something that you think is wrong with the test, please raise an issue, because this is part of the process, is helping everyone in the ecosystem test the tests. Zhao.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Ralph. My doubt is the tests you demonstrated to us right now, they are only for the security requirements, right? I mean, as I understood, you're calling the APIs from Brazilian open banking, but are the results of those APIs being verified somehow, or because we have, for our certifications, we have to be compliant to security requirements and functional requirements. Those tests you demonstrated, they do both verifications or just security verifications?
Those tests do both. However, at the start of the meeting, no, sorry, those tests do security. However, at the start of the meeting, I said there were 3 tests.
Oh, okay.
We'll get onto the functional ones in just a moment.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on the security tests? No. Okay, moving straight on to the functional.
Is that FAPI profile tailored for primitives and methods that are supported in the in our Brazilian specification, or is that are all the FAPI profile available for testing?
You can run all of the FAPI profiles if you want. However, the one that you have to certify is the Open Banking Brazil. Only the Open Banking Brazil is integrated with the Consents API, and only the Open Banking Brazil will pass the reference to the Consent API in a dynamic scope. Australia uses a sharing ID, and the United Kingdom uses an overloads an ID token. So you can't use any of those profiles with your end-to-end security requirements. So you can, by all means, you can confirm that you are generic FAPI compliant, but the requirement for Open Banking Brazil is to be able to handle the complete consent end-to-end lifecycle. And so you need to complete the Open Banking Brazil certifications, which is the only one that uses the Open Banking Brazil consent and authorization standards.
Hi, Ralph. Can you please share with us that URL of that explains with your inputs of your test here? The GitLab link.
Oh, the GitLab link. Oh, yeah, sure, can do. The GitLab link is actually linked off the OpenID Foundation certification page. So if you go to openid.net and click certification, all of the documentation, the how-to guides, everything is on, very well documented, and it's all included as part of the instructions. So you've got how-to, specifications, instructions for running the relying parties. That will take you to all of the different, the link to the GitLab, which will give you access to all of the different information that you may require. So that's straight to the wiki, and as you can see, you've got the Brazil specifications on the right hand side. You've also got access to all the code, and if you find an issue, please raise a ticket.
Thank you.
Cool. Any final questions on security? We can always come back and I can redo this as many times as is required. But let's move on to the functional test. So what the what Radium has been doing in conjunction with the OpenID Foundation is making sure that we can use the same testing suite and the same testing services that we have jointly been developing, but to test the functional APIs. Now, the OpenID Foundation doesn't want to do functional APIs. They don't want to be maintaining those functional APIs. So we have a fork of the OpenID Foundation certification suite. Just a little bit of trivia. Originally, the Radium took the contract to develop a lot of this stuff as part of our engagement with the Open Banking implementation entity. So it's quite useful to have it all being used again for another jurisdiction. So again, it's exactly the same thing. It's the same test suite, it's the same test bag. If you can't find a document that says, what do I do on the Brazil GitLab, then there will be a corresponding document on the Open Banking, the OpenID Foundation GitLab. So again, same thing. This time we are going to run a test, and we're going to select the functional accounts test for the accounts APIs. All of the other APIs are being added as we speak. In fact, I'll demonstrate what happens when you're trying to test against a moving target. So we're going to test the functional test for the accounts API. And in this test, we've got a deliberately failing API. So you can see what happens when you do the test. So again, fill out the same client. You can copy your configuration straight from one the security profile test straight into here. Same CPF, same consent, same account. And now we're going to run the API for the account test for the API. Now we did a release for this about 10 minutes before this demo, so knowing our luck, it may or may not fully function, but let's go and give it a go. So same thing, number of tests are running, it's setting itself up, it's creating a consent, it's posting the consent to the server, it's prompting the user to log in. We've got that go and boot itself up from cold. We can see, let's see what it asked for. What did I do? I did a pushed authorization endpoint request. I got my pushed authorization response. I posted my request URI, made sure that I was had sufficient entropy, and same thing, I'm going to select my accounts, I'm going to consent to sharing data. It's going to finish the redirect back. I'm going to close my tab, and the tests are going to continue, and it's going to do a lot of the basics validation that was done in the previous security tests, just for happy path. It's making sure that the authorization server did what it needed to correctly. And now it's going to go and start doing the resource server tests. So we'll be making sure that there's valid XFAPI customer ID headers, and then we're going to start running the accounts APIs. So we call the, where are we? First one was we called the accounts API, validating the accounts API. All the different tests for different regexes and fields, and that passed. Next one is we're going to use that result set to call a specific account inside the account API. Same tests. Here's the response to a specific account inside that that list, and it's doing some tests. But we've got a failure. And in this case, it said, right, I was unable to find a data element called subtype on the account identification API response. And as you can see, this is what was sent back, and there is no subtype. So very clear errors, very clear descriptions about what the error was. Was it a failure of regex? Was it a missing field? Was it a mandatory property that was not present, et cetera, et cetera. Now that one's not a cease failing test. There are other tests that are carrying on. So in the background, we've also done, or we continue to do a fetch account balance test. So it's retrieved the balance API for that account, checked all the fields and all the properties of that. And then we've called the fetch account transactions endpoint, which is pulled back. We've only got one for this particular account that is selected, one transaction in that list, and it then goes and does all the validations for that transaction as well. Fetch account limits, same thing. It's done a limits test, and finally it says I've run to completion. At the top of my test, you get the description of what actually failed. If you want to click on that one, it will take you to the exact failure. And as I said, it gives you a very detailed breakdown of what has failed, what has not failed. And this is where we start having the conversation. Is it a problem with the test? Is it a problem with the API? Is it a problem with the Swagger? And so the expectation would be that if you encounter a failure, you want to review all three of those things. And if something is wrong with your API, in which in the case of this one here, it is, you'd go and fix it, rerun the test, and let it go green. Or if it's a problem or something that's incorrect with the either the reference examples or the Swagger specification, you would raise a ticket on the Open Banking Brazil GitHub for the functional API team to do the first triage. Now, this process has already started. We've discovered quite a few different things with different APIs and different endpoints, and the functional API team are pretty good at turning around changes quickly. Likewise, so are the Sensidia reference examples, which does make challenges for incorporating the pace of change quite challenging when things are being updated literally an hour before a demo. So one of the tasks that we've now got is to go and incorporate the latest changes that have been made to the reference examples. So in the case of something like the balance API, originally there was no trailing decimal places, and that was failing a regular expression check, which meant that we had some failing tests. So whilst there is a significant level of change in both the specifications and the reference examples, we do ask for a little bit of patience, but likewise we really want to encourage banks to start the process of functional conformance and certification such that you can help the functional team bottom out any issues quickly so that they can be addressed, because the longer they go on, the slower it will be to have those capabilities, all these issues identified and sorted. I think that's enough from me. Zhao, do you have another question, mate?
Hi, good morning. A question of the journal of consent. Is test prepared for a journal consent with more than one screen?
So Radium's not testing the adherence to the customer experience guidelines. That's not something that we're been asked to test as the functional APIs. It's a very good question in terms of the certification to the CEGs, and it's something that I think Miro should take a note of and work with the Sandbox team to decide what certification processes there will be to the CEG guidelines for banks, consents, and authorization number of screens.
Okay.
Hey, I guess I'm next one in line. So my doubt is that at some point in some work groups, I guess someone told us about the possibility that the functional tests could exist without the security requirements coupled. Like you could just test functional requirements. As at least I saw your tests, it's basically using all the FAPI profile requirements. So is there any possibility for us to test just the functional part of the APIs?
Yeah, so if you wanted to go and test your own payloads, the easiest way for you to test that is to pull down and follow the local development instructions for the test harness, which are all included here. So there's a complete developer getting, where are we? I'm blind. Here, which will allow you to pull down all of the tests and run them locally with whatever options that you want on or off. There obviously isn't a hosted version that expects to be able to access resources in an unsecured manner, given this is customer data that's a little bit nonsensical. But what you can do is run all of the tests locally, and you can turn off whatever tests that you like. The other option that you have got is that with every one of the tests that are being added in, you'll see, where are we? Where's my good post? Let's just go to changes. Cool. You'll see that every one of these tests has got an example payload. So if you have the ability to generate from your own servers your own example payloads for your tests, you simply take your payloads, drop them in, run the test suite, and that will confirm whether or not that you pass or fail against your own payloads, just using your local CI/CD or a local developer workstation.
But this way, I'm not exactly testing my host, right? I'm just testing my payloads.
That's correct, but okay. You can't test your host really without testing your security. Because
okay.
If you've got an API endpoint that's serving customer data on demand with no access control or securities in front of it, that would be an interesting LGDP position. And that really is it. So as again, we've said previously, this has been shared. All the tests and all the processes, all of the velocity is all being developed in the open. Anyone can review any of the changes. Anyone can look at the tests, add new, submit a pull request for new tests, challenge the tests, raise issues against the tests. And ultimately, we really hope that the ecosystem itself uses this harness to then start developing its own and enhancing its own tests in terms of taking long-term ownership for the maturity, the development, and the growth of the certification service and payloads. because it is all open source and it is all available for you to do with what you will. And again, it's a great testing harness, and it's a great testing process for testing your own APIs. So for those banks that are looking for end-to-end security testing against, say, some of your commercial propositions that you're going to develop off the back of open banking, it is a great capability to be able to do that. The final thing I should mention is that when you've completed a test suite or a test execution, the final task will be to follow the same instructions as we'd already articulated in the OpenID Foundation. You're going to click the button that says Publish Everything. Oh, it's locked me out. And this test link will be included on the GitHub. The GitHub is a public attestation of you saying to the ecosystem, I've passed all my tests. I'm 100% compliant with this particular version of the test profile. Feel free to come and review my logs and confirm that I haven't done anything underhanded or sneaky. And that is it.
So I don't know if anyone has any question or would like Ralph to go through a specific step again, as we have a few more minutes.
Okay, then. So,
eu tenho uma pergunta, mas se alguém puder traduzir para mim, para maior clareza, eu agradeceria.
Sem problema.
Ok, é o seguinte. A FAP cita várias RFCs, correto? Eu gostaria de saber se o teste BR utiliza apenas os métodos de autenticação e autorização efetivamente obrigatórios para o Open Banking Brasil, ou se ele está testando a RFC inteira, a documentação, ou seja, o requisito inteiro.
André, você traduz para o Ralph?
Você pode, desculpa, eu estava em mudo aqui. Você pode traduzir, Alexandre? Acho que vai ter menos chance de errar, senão eu traduzo.
Sure. Ralph, the question we got from Henrique is our Brazilian open banking security profile points to a lot of RFCs from FAPI, and the FAPI itself points to a lot of RFCs. The question is our certification testing only the requirements stated in open banking Brazilian profile, or the inner RFCs as well?
Oh no, the inner RFCs. It tests the entire triangle. So you're right at the top with open banking Brazil, but in order to be compliant there, you have to contest all of the underlying RFCs that it's built on.
Sure. Henrique, não sei se foi Henrique, né, que perguntou?
Entendido, já está entendido.
Então é isso mesmo. Então, além do que está no nosso security profile, também as RFCs que ele referencia.
Ralph, could you paste the complete link of the complete path of these tests on the chat, please? I can't access.
Levantar aqui. Será que ele consegue me ajudar? Fazer uma
Thanks,
tradução?
Pode perguntar.
que acontece? Eu estava vendo aí que tem uns códigos em Java nesse teste e tal. Só que eu queria tentar entender a aplicabilidade, por exemplo, no .NET, se eu conseguiria pegar esses mesmos testes e apontar para os meus pontos e tal, ou se eu teria que fazer realmente um deploy e apontar dentro os meus links de deploy para esse teste rodar aqui na minha máquina. Ou eu não conseguiria fazer na minha máquina, só remotamente. Deu para entender ou falei muita coisa?
Não, deu para entender. Ralph, a question from Nelson, and he's asking, he notices that in the GitLab and in other tabs of your browser that has a lot of Java code, and he's wondering if he will be able to run those tests in his machine, or it is only available in the certification tools that are published in online.
No, you can run the whole thing locally.
Okay. Just have to check out the code and make a deploy, right?
So see this to build, building from the source.
Oh, that's great.
Full end to end, everything that you could possibly want to do. So again, the expectation would be if you want to contribute to the tests, download it, run it locally, add the tests, submit a pull request.
Eu não tinha visto essa página, gente. Obrigado, tá?
Okay, I think it's clear. Any further questions, guys? Mais alguma pergunta?
Eu tenho uma, se puder também me ajudar aí com a tradução, por favor. Eu gostaria de entender, ali, pelo que eu entendi do teste, né, ele está testando muito o lado do servidor, né? Então ele simula a parte client para poder fazer o acesso ao servidor de autorização com todo o fluxo de DCR.
Sim.
Existe algum teste disponível para o processo contrário, para validar todo o fluxo de requisição do lado do receptor do dado? Obrigado.
Okay, Ralph, Marcus is asking if we had a similar test suite for the TPP side, for the partner, or the client side. So I could see you have a dummy bank running, but I'm not sure if we have automated tests to
Yes.
Okay.
So they're called the relying party tests. Now, the relying party tests are being focused on the security side only, not the functional side. So they make sure from a security point of view, the TPP does the correct thing, because dealing with functional messages should be a matter of processing a Swagger. We don't see input in terms of relying party tests for the TPP side. Now, the Open Banking Brazil the OpenID Foundation is with us, is going to release relying party tests for Brazil. What is still not clear is whether or not Brazil is going to make the passing of those tests mandatory for TPP accreditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I personally believe it is a very good idea for TPPs to be required to pass the tests. As you can see, they are not hard, particularly for the TPP. They are straightforward. They're very, very straightforward. However, I understand that in some jurisdictions there is a pushback on TPPs having to certify. Now, that is a policy decision, not a technical decision, and the tests will be in beta sometime next week, according to the OpenID Foundation process.
Perfect. Marcos, não sei se você pegou a ideia, então assim, a OpenID Foundation vai disponibilizar os testes para o lado de cliente, né, para o Relying Party, em beta a partir da próxima semana. Esses que a gente fez aqui são focados no servidor, porque isso é a exigência que os GTs fizeram para as instituições poderem expor as suas APIs. Então, para o lado server-side, né, para o lado do ASP/SP, sim, a gente vai ter a certificação e as ferramentas servem para garantir que o ecossistema vai estar seguro na entrada dos ASP/SPs, né, das transmissoras. E das receptoras, como o Ralph disse, a ideia é, se você precisar testar o cliente, idealmente os swaggers, a validação dos esquemas e os swaggers já tem tudo que você precisa para testar funcionalmente um cliente que está consumindo uma API, mas para segurança, a OpenID Foundation vai disponibilizar os clientes em beta a partir da próxima semana, mesmo não tendo a obrigatoriedade de testar e certificar os TPPs, apesar dele imaginar que pode ser uma boa ideia isso ser discutido.
Muito obrigado, Alexandre. Thank you, Ralph.
It would be very useful to get an answer to this from a policy point of view pretty quickly.
Sure.
Cool. Well, as always, if there's anything that we can do or Radium can do to help the ecosystem, please do let us know. For participants that are going to start running this test, there's an agreed process that's being put in place between Miro, the sandbox testing team, the functional API ownership, and our own support teams. But if there's anything above and beyond that you think we could help you with, please do feel to reach out. And apart from that, best of luck with your testing and certification over the next 4 weeks. There will be continuous improvements to the functional certification tests. In fact, we actually had to go and, before this demo, make a change because these new examples have been introduced less than, well, now 2 hours ago, which we now need to go and incorporate into the tests and then update the regular expressions that have now been included in the updated functional API. So please do be patient in terms of running those tests, and please make sure that you check your implementation specification, both the current version, and it might be prudent to check the previous version as well. For example, when I looked at the balances here, you can see very quickly that 1 hour ago, the structure of the balance changed from being an integer to a double. And so when you're doing your own investigation, please make sure that you're reviewing not just the current version of the Swagger specification, but also potentially the previous one, and just be mindful that there are still changes that are being incorporated.
I think we have 2 more questions. Nelson, George.
Hi. A simple question. What the business endpoints will be tested in the first version of the year? All endpoints, customers, accounts?
So the aim is to have all of the functional APIs for phase 2 included in the test suite before, well, we're going to try and aim for within the next 2 weeks. So you've got all of them, but as I said, they will be staggered and released out. Andre and Miro can talk about a change to the central bank's delivery cadence that's recently been announced because it's a policy, I believe, a policy change from the central bank as to what needs to be done first and when. But from our point of view, we're trying to deliver as per our previously agreed delivery timescales and project plan. So to give you the example, for those of you that are going to download and run this locally, you can see that all of the tests are now there, or most of the tests.
Could you share the screen again, please? Thank you very much.
So for those of you that are going to go and download the test plan and update your own local tests, you can see that there are now tests for more than just the accounts API. What we are now working on, and then the next step for us will be to build the test plans so that we test that you've now got those as an item inside the drop down. So it's just a matter of wiring in these tests into the resource calls. But the cadence is we're on track and we are delivering as agreed as part of the project plan.
Nelson?
The build and run talk to Linux or Mac OS. Windows just to do in Docker, correctly?
Possibly, yes. The majority of people and developers from the international community that use this, I know, use either Macs or Linux machines. There is some commentary on how to get this running from Windows point of view, but it isn't something that we've had to come across before.
Okay, thank you.
But because it's Java, there should be no reason why it doesn't function.
Claudinei.
Hi, Ralph. Thank you for your presentation. My doubt is related to the tool running locally on the machine. The tools running locally covers only the aspects of the message like syntax and payload, or covers the security layer as well?
You can run the entire thing locally. The entire test suite runs locally. So if you can stand up an authorization server and an API gateway and locally, that is completely fine. If you want to run it and a copy for yourself or internal bank testing against your own internal or development systems, that is perfectly fine as well. It is a tool and a capability that essentially acts as a very complex TPP that's got all of the options and all of the capabilities to interact with banks and all of their different choices that they may make. And the entire tool can be run locally.
Okay, thank you.
Ralph, excuse me, I just add one more thing to your answer em português, ok? Então, pessoal, só para deixar claro, é possível rodar a ferramenta localmente, igual o Ralph falou, com todas as funcionalidades, mas a certificação vai ser feita somente na ferramenta centralizada que o Ralph mostrou ali. Então, para tirar o certificado, vai ser necessário executar na ferramenta da Radian que está deployada ali no link que a gente viu. Rodando localmente só para conseguir vencer os testes, conseguir fazer ali vencer a barreira inicial.
Com licença, uma clarificação com relação à resposta dele anterior sobre escopo, FAP versus Open Banking BR. Para o processo de certificação burocrático, o resultado aqui desse teste ele tem que ser verde ou ele vai permitir não compliance em itens efetivamente não utilizados pelo Open Banking BR?
Eu acho que eu posso dar essa resposta, eu posso até perguntar para o Ralph, mas a ideia é que o Security Profile do Open Banking Brasil, ele é uma extensão da FAP, que é uma extensão do OpenID e por aí vai. Então, o teste é a certificação de todos os casos de uso.
Então, ele é um superset e não um subset.
Exato, ele é um superset. A ideia, e aí eu vou até pedir para o Ralph complementar, mas a ideia é que o Security Profile Brasil, ele diz, empreguem o FAP1 Advanced, mas essas são as restrições que o Brasil impõe ao FAP1 Advanced, ou seja, as características como os algoritmos criptográficos, as extensões, são essas que o Brasil usa. Tá? Ralph, Henrique is asking for an update, a clarification in this subject of our confirmation tests regarding if we are going to evaluate just the Open Banking Security Profile tests, or the whole suite must be green in order to certify. I kind of get ahead and say that we are going for the whole set because our security profile is an extension of the FAPI Advanced, and so the complete set of requirements are needed in order to pass the certification test, right? And if you want to...
Yeah, that's correct. So if you look at the, let's go back to the plan. Oh, it's logged me up. So this test is going to test your adherence to the FAPI Open Banking Brazil profile. All of these tests need to pass. Now, all of these tests use the options that are defined in FAPI Open Banking Brazil. So with FAPI, this is testing your adherence to the FAPI1 Advanced profile Open Banking Brazil flavor. So it all has to be green.
Okay.
Nelson?
No.
Perdão, gente, eu deixei aqui a mão levantada, perdão.
Sorry, I just want to be very clear. The OpenID Foundation will require this all to be green in order for them to certify that you are conformant. Where things may be more interesting is on the functional APIs. So the functional API process, if you think it's a problem with the specifications, take it up with the specification team. If you think it's a problem with the tests, well, take it up with the testing team. The policy that goes for certification or not certification will depend on the failures. Obviously, if it's all green, and for example, you've tested on the 14th of July, you're far more likely to get a bigger test, a more complete test, and therefore more likely to be certified. For example, certification at the moment is not open because the APIs have only just been updated. The example specifications have only been just updated. And so the coverage at the moment for that accounts API is insufficient for anyone to be certified. In addition, there has been only one person that has actually run the tests. This is against the Radium Bank. How do you know we are correct? Until there are sufficient implementers, and this group collectively have come together and said, we've all run the tests, we're happy with the coverage, we're happy that we've ironed out the big issues with the specifications. This is now version 1 of the test suite. And at that point, Miro can start certifying people, or Miro can say, this is good enough for us to start certifying the ecosystem. That's a policy question, not a technology one.
Alexandre?
I've got a question that I think it's directed to the Miro guys regarding exactly this policy point. I'll switch to Portuguese, okay, Ralph?
Yeah, cool.
Pessoal, uma pergunta é exatamente com relação à validação dessa certificação. Eu entendo que a Miro está com a governança desses testes e a Miro que vai, junto com os resultados da OpenID Foundation, habilitar ou não habilitar as instituições a production ready. Então, logo a gente tem os resultados. É isso? Ou isso está com o subgrupo de sandbox?
Alexandre, se eu puder fazer a resposta aqui e alguém me complementa. Mas a emissão do certificado, tá? A geração dele, a análise do resultado do seu teste, para segurança vai ser feita pela OpenID Foundation e ela vai publicar no site deles que a instituição está compliant. E a análise e certificação funcional vai ser feita pela própria Radium. E aí a Radium também vai publicar, vai disponibilizar ali a sua certificação. E aí a instituição ela vai subir um documento atestando que fez os testes na API que ela vai usar em produção. Tem um processinho aí que a gente está montando. E aí vai ficar disponível para consulta os certificados da instituição. Não vai ser algo bloqueante.
Esse é o processinho que eu estava imaginando, assim. Isso vai estar amarrado com o diretório, é uma flag que vai estar o ativo ou inativo, habilitado ou não habilitado. Ou
a gente não vai fazer bloqueante, então, assim, você não vai precisar estar lá com o certificado verde para estar em produção. Mas vai ser continuamente checado, né, pela estrutura, pelo próprio Banco Central, se os participantes que estão em produção estão com certificados em dia.
Ok.
Com certificações, tá? Vamos falar certificações e não certificados, só para não ocorrer confusão.
Só indo nessa linha, cada API nova que for publicada, a gente vai ter que refazer?
Isso, como a gente vai ter a entrada faseada na fase 2, né? A gente está discutindo aqui que a certificação dessas APIs também podem ocorrer de maneira faseada. Então, para o T0 lá que está sendo chamado, vai precisar certificar somente aquele set de APIs que vai para o T0, para o T1 vai precisar ter a certificação das APIs do T1 e assim sucessivamente.
Talvez até esclarecendo, a certificação ela é por API, então...
Isso, pelo grupo, né?
Pelo grupo de APIs, a família de APIs.
Então vou ter um certificado para o grupo Accounts, um certificado para o grupo de operações de crédito.
Exato.
E aí eu posso passar no Accounts, e tá verdinho no Accounts, mas não passar no crédito, entendeu?
Perfeito, pessoal. Obrigado.
Por quanto tempo vai valer a certificação se eu validar agora? Depois de quanto tempo eu tenho que revalidar, né? Se alterar alguma coisa. Quanto tempo vai valer essa certificação?
Ricardo, esse é um assunto que o squad de sandbox a gente já começou a conversa com o GT de segurança para a gente determinar o prazo de validade da certificação, basicamente. E a gente tá chegando em termos de entendimento ainda e a gente vai publicar assim que tiver algo sólido, tá? Mas a gente está analisando aí o prazo disso. Vai depender, assim, posso já talvez adiantar aqui que um caminho que a gente está analisando é o versionamento das especificações. Então, seguindo o versionamento, a gente alterar um versionamento vai implicar em novas certificações, entendeu? Mas ainda a gente vai ter uma publicação de um guia nas próximas semanas que a gente vai cobrir esse assunto também, tá?
Ok.
Ok, a câmera
comentando aqui, eu acho que a certificação de segurança vai ser algo mais estável, né? Então, conversando com o jeito de segurança, talvez seja uma duração mais longa o certificado, ou até considerando não ter validade, e só precisaria ser certificado de segurança se trocasse a versão do FAP ou alguma mudança significativa no FAP, né? Mas ainda está em discussão. E a funcional seria algo mais dinâmico, né? Dado que os versionamentos das APIs vão acontecer de forma mais frequente, principalmente agora no início, né? E até para uma certa segurança do ecossistema, talvez nesse começo as validades sejam curtas, 3 meses, para garantir que, por exemplo, pegamos alguns erros no motor de conformidade e um teste não estava sendo feito direito para algum teste não estava sendo feito direito e todo mundo está certificado. Então, com uma validade curta, a gente conseguiria recertificar cobrindo esse teste novamente. Mas essas validades ainda estão sendo pensadas pelo GT e a gente vai publicar junto com o guia em poucas semanas aí.
Talvez só lembrando que o teste ao contrário do teste de segurança que é pago, os testes de conformidade funcional não tem custo, né, para os participantes.
Tá, a câmera do Ralph saiu, vou perguntar em português mesmo. Nos testes das APIs funcionais, eu não preciso usar meus dados reais não, né? Os dados mocados do servidor de teste podem ser usados.
Isso, vai ser possível realizar os testes no seu servidor que a gente está chamando aqui de pré-produção, tá? Um servidor de staging, de homologação, pré-produção. E, inclusive, complementando até a pergunta que o Alexandre tinha feito, nos termos que a instituição vai subir quando ela fizer a certificação dela, se ela usar um ambiente pré-produtivo, ela vai atestar ali que os serviços que ela usou no ambiente dela, né, as APIs dela que ela usou em pré-produção, vão ser os que ela vai usar em produção também. Vai ser a mesma versão no deploy, entendeu?
Ok, entendi sim.
Mas vai ser possível testar em um ambiente tão produtivo.
Nelson?
Com a fase 3, né, do que a gente viu hoje. Desculpa, a fase 2. O que a gente já tem de definição da fase 2 que serve para a fase 3, né, e qual a expectativa de publicar o restante das informações para a fase 3?
Nelson, cortou um pouco aqui para mim, eu não sei se eu entendi sua pergunta, você me corrige qualquer coisa. Você quer saber quando que a gente vai ter os testes publicados para a fase 3, certo?
Isso mesmo, correto. Oi, você me ouviu?
Ouvi. Não, tudo bem.
Isso,
Então,
mesmo.
o foco inicial agora está sendo em fazer o deploy dessa ferramenta com todas as especificações da fase 2. Conforme o Ralph falou ali, para a gente utilizar a ferramenta, tentar passar nos testes, validar, né, os testes, levantar tickets caso a gente enxergue algum bug possível no Swagger, que seja, na ferramenta. E aí, quando a gente chegar numa estabilidade dessa ferramenta, a gente consegue falar de fase 3. Eu entendo também que a gente ainda não tem todas as especificações da fase 3 criada. Então, ou seja, é um requerimento aí a gente ter as especificações da fase 3 e o desenvolvimento para a fase 3 vai começar assim que a gente tiver as coisas da fase 2, os testes da fase 2 finalizados. Mas é algo que ainda não foi discutido. A gente está focando aqui na fase 2 do momento.
Ok, obrigado.
Ok, alguma pergunta adicional? Ok, então acho que a gente pode concluir. Eu acho que só ressaltar aqui um ponto que o Ralph colocou, né, da importância de utilizar a ferramenta que está disponível. Isso é super importante para calibrar a ferramenta, para identificar erros, enfim. Então, a gente incentiva bastante aí que todos utilizem e identificando erros, reportem, né, para o bem comum aí de todos os participantes. Então, fica aí esse recado. E I would like to thank Ralph, if you're there, and see you next time. Obrigado a todos. Até o próximo evento aqui do Open Banking. Obrigado.
Valeu, tchau.
Obrigado.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
O time de sandbox vai ficar aqui?
Eu acho que vamos passar para um outro convite, talvez.
Então vamos usar o normal, né? Vou mudar de sala aqui.
Ari, já que você tá online, eu tenho que remover todo mundo da reunião.
Eu tô...
Por isso que eu ignorei você.